Growing up, I was never just me. In my family, I was the failure. It wasn't a title I earned overnight. It was slowly handed to me, piece by piece, comparison by comparison, until it became my identity in their eyes. At every family gathering, there was always something to measure me against. My cousins were the golden examples, top of their classes, accepted into prestigious universities, already mapping out their futures with confidence. Meanwhile, I struggled to find my path. I wasn't sure what I wanted, and that uncertainty made me an easy target. Look at Sarah. She's already in medical school. Ollie just got a job at a big company.
And you?
That question, and you, always came with a look, a mix of disappointment and judgment that cut deeper than any harsh words. At first, I tried to explain myself. I told them I was figuring things out, that not everyone moves at the same pace. But my words never seemed to matter. In their minds, success had a fixed timeline, and I had already fallen behind. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was exhausting to defend myself over and over again. No matter what I said, it never changed how they saw me. So, I grew quiet. I sat through dinners, nodded at conversations, and ignored the subtle jabs disguised as advice. What hurt the most wasn't the criticism, it was the lack of belief. Not one person asked what I wanted or what I dreamed of becoming. They had already decided who I was, and they weren't interested in anything that challenged that narrative. Over time, I began to internalize it. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was behind. Maybe I really was the failure they believed me to be. But deep down, beneath all the doubt and silence, there was a small voice inside me that refused to agree. I didn't know my path yet, but I knew this couldn't be the end of my story. By the time I turned 22, the label had started to feel heavier than ever. Every visit home felt like stepping into a room where my future had already been decided for me, and it wasn't a bright one. I realized something had to change. Not them, but me. One night, after another long, silent dinner filled with subtle disappointment, I sat alone in my room and made a decision. If I stayed, I would slowly become exactly who they believed I was. And that scared me more than failure itself. So I chose to leave. There was no big announcement, no emotional goodbye. I didn't want another lecture or another round of judgment. I packed a small bag with a few clothes, some savings I had managed to scrape together, and a notebook filled with ideas I had never shared with anyone. The next morning, I walked out quietly. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going or what I planned to do. In a strange way, that hurt more than anything else. It confirmed what I had always felt. I wasn't someone they believed in. I moved to a new city where no one knew me, where I wasn't the failure anymore, just another person trying to figure life out. The freedom was both exciting and terrifying. For the first time, there were no expectations placed on me, but there was also no safety net. Every decision was mine. Every mistake would be mine too. At first, the silence felt overwhelming. No family voices, no comparisons, just me and my thoughts. I questioned myself constantly. What if they were right? What if I really couldn't make it? But then another thought followed. What if they were wrong? That single question became my fuel. I didn't have a clear plan, and I didn't have guarantees. All I had was a quiet determination to prove, if not to them, then at least to myself, that I was more than the label they gave me. And for the first time in my life, I was finally in control of my own story. The reality of starting over hit me faster than I expected. The new city didn't welcome me with opportunities. It tested me. Every day felt like a fight just to stay afloat. My savings disappeared quicker than I had planned, and soon, survival became my only focus. I took whatever jobs I could find. Morning shifts at a small cafe, evening work at a warehouse, and sometimes late-night freelance tasks online that barely paid anything. I was constantly exhausted, running on little sleep and cheap meals. Some days, I skipped eating altogether just to make sure I could pay rent. My apartment wasn't really an apartment. It was a shared space with strangers who were also chasing something better. We barely spoke. Everyone had their own struggles, their own silent battles. There were moments when I questioned everything. Late at night, lying on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, doubts would creep in. What am I doing? Was leaving a mistake? No one was there to answer those questions. No encouragement, no reassurance, just silence. But in that silence, something unexpected started to grow. I began to observe, to learn, to pay attention to how money worked, how people built businesses, how opportunities were created instead of waited for. During my short breaks, I would read articles, watch videos, and take notes in the same notebook I had brought with me. Slowly, my mindset began to shift. I realized that success wasn't about having a perfect start, it was about persistence, about showing up every single day, even when nothing seemed to be working. I started experimenting with small online ideas. Most of them failed. Some didn't even get noticed. But each failure taught me something valuable. Instead of seeing them as proof that I was a failure, I started seeing them as steps forward. No one clapped for me. No one even knew what I was going through. But for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything to my family anymore. I was building something quietly, something real. And even though I had nothing to show for it yet, deep down I knew I wasn't the same person who had walked away. For a long time, it felt like I was putting in effort with nothing to show for it. Every idea I tried either failed quickly or faded away without results. But I didn't stop. By then, I had learned something important. Consistency mattered more than immediate success. One night, after another long shift, I sat down with my notebook and revisited an idea I had almost given up on. It was simple, nothing revolutionary. In fact, that's why I had doubted it before. I thought success had to come from something big, something impressive. But this time, I approached it differently. Instead of overthinking, I focused on execution. I spent hours researching, adjusting, and improving the idea. I paid attention to small details, what people needed, what problems I could solve, and how I could deliver value in the simplest way possible. Within a few weeks, something unexpected happened. It worked. At first, it was just a small result, my first real earnings from something I had built myself. I remember staring at the screen, refreshing it again and again, just to make sure it was real. It wasn't a huge amount, but to me, it meant everything. For the first time, I saw proof that I was capable. That small win changed my mindset completely. It wasn't about the money, it was about validation. Not from my family, but from reality itself. My efforts were finally turning into results. I didn't celebrate loudly. There was no one around to celebrate with anyway. But inside, something shifted. The doubt that had followed me for years started to weaken. Instead of stopping there, I doubled down. I reinvested every bit of what I earned back into improving the idea. I learned more, tested more, and refined my approach. Slowly, the small trickle of income began to grow into something steady. It wasn't overnight success. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward. After that first breakthrough, something inside me changed. I no longer chased quick wins or easy success. I understood now that real growth took time, and I was finally willing to give it that time. I kept working the same exhausting jobs, but now they felt different. They were no longer my only source of survival. They were funding my future. Every extra rupee I earned had a purpose. I saved aggressively and invested carefully, always thinking a few steps ahead. My small idea continued to grow. It didn't explode overnight, but it improved steadily. I started adding new strategies, testing different approaches, and learning from every mistake along the way. Slowly, one stream of income turned into two, then three. I entered the world of online business more seriously, freelancing, digital products, small investments. I didn't master everything at once, but I stayed consistent. That consistency became my biggest strength. What surprised me the most was how quiet my journey remained. No one from my family called to check on me. No one asked if I was okay or if I had succeeded. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need them to know. There was power in silence. I remembered every moment they had doubted me, every comparison, every time I was made to feel less than everyone else. But instead of letting it fill me with anger, I used it as fuel. I wasn't building success to prove them wrong anymore. I was building it because I finally believed I could. Years passed, and my life began to change in ways I once thought were impossible. I moved into a better apartment. I had financial stability. I wasn't rich yet, but I was no longer struggling either. And still, I stayed quiet. No social media posts. No announcements. No updates to anyone back home. Because deep down, I knew something. When the time came, I wouldn't need to explain anything. My results would speak for themselves. It had been years since I last attended a family gathering. Over time, the calls stopped, the messages faded, and the distance between us became normal. I built a life so separate from them that sometimes I almost forgot how it used to feel sitting at those crowded dinner tables, being silently judged. Then, one afternoon, out of nowhere, I received a message. It was a formal invitation to a large family reunion. Everyone would be there, uncles, aunts, cousins, even distant relatives I barely remembered. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unsure how to react. My first instinct was to ignore it. Why go back to a place where I was never truly valued? Why sit through the same conversations, the same comparisons, the same subtle reminders of who they thought I was? But something felt different this time. I wasn't the same person anymore. The thought stayed with me for days. I went back and forth in my mind, debating whether it was worth it. Part of me wanted to protect the peace I had built. Another part of me felt like I needed to face them. Not for revenge, not even for validation, but for closure. I realized I had spent years moving forward, but I had never really closed that chapter of my life. So, I made a decision. I would go. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove anything. Just to stand there, as I was now, and see if the past still had any power over me. The day of the reunion, I prepared quietly. There was no nervous rush, no anxiety like before. I chose simple, clean clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that tried too hard. I didn't need appearances to speak for me anymore. As I made my way there, I could feel a strange calm inside me. This time, I wasn't walking into that room as the failure. I was walking in as someone who had built something from nothing, silently, patiently, and on my own terms. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what they might say. I was curious. The moment I stepped into the reunion hall, it felt like time hadn't moved at all. The same groups of relatives stood in their usual circles, laughing, talking, exchanging updates about careers, marriages, and achievements. For a second, I just stood near the entrance, taking it all in. Years had passed, but the atmosphere was exactly how I remembered it. Then someone noticed me. "Oh, you came," one of my cousins said, sounding slightly surprised. Within minutes, a few more relatives gathered around. Smiles were exchanged, greetings were polite, but something beneath the surface hadn't changed. I could still feel it, the quiet judgment, the curiosity, the expectations they had already formed about me. "So, what are you doing these days?" an aunt asked casually. The question sounded simple, but I knew what it really meant. I gave a small smile. "Just working on a few things." It was vague on purpose. Almost immediately, I noticed the subtle reactions. A quick glance between two cousins. A faint smirk from someone standing behind. It was the same old assumption. They believed nothing had changed. And strangely, it didn't bother me anymore. I moved through the room, greeting people I hadn't seen in years. Some were genuinely warm, but most carried that same tone of polite disinterest. Conversations shifted quickly when I joined, as if I didn't have much to contribute. At one point, I overheard someone whisper, "I think he's still figuring things out." Another voice replied softly, "Some people just take longer or never do." I heard it clearly. Years ago, those words would have crushed me. They would have stayed in my mind for days, making me question everything about myself. But now, I just smiled to myself. Because for the first time, I wasn't standing there trying to change their minds. I wasn't searching for approval or trying to prove my worth through words. They were still seeing the old version of me, and I let them. I took a seat at the dinner table, quietly observing everyone around me, the confident conversations, the proud achievements being shared, the familiar patterns repeating themselves. Nothing had changed for them, but everything had changed for me, and they had no idea what was coming next. Dinner had just begun when the attention slowly shifted toward me. At first, it was subtle. A few glances. A pause in conversations whenever I spoke. I could feel it building, the curiosity, the judgment, the quiet expectation that I would once again confirm the role they had always given me. Then it happened. My uncle, the same one who used to compare me to everyone else, leaned back in his chair and spoke loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "So," he said with a slight smile, "what do you actually do these days?" The table went silent. Forks paused midair. Conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward me. It was the moment they had been waiting for. Years ago, this question would have made my heart race. I would have stumbled over my words, trying to explain myself in a way that sounded acceptable to them. But now, I felt completely calm. I placed my glass down slowly and looked around the table. "I work on a few businesses," I said simply. There was a brief pause, then a few quiet chuckles. "Businesses?" one cousin repeated, clearly amused. "What kind of businesses?" another asked, raising an eyebrow. I could hear the doubt in their voices. To them, it probably sounded like another vague answer, another attempt to hide the fact that I hadn't achieved anything. I didn't rush to explain. Instead, I leaned back slightly, meeting their eyes one by one. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking under their attention. I was holding it. "I run some online ventures," I added calmly, "and I invest as well." Again, silence, but this time it felt different. They weren't convinced.
Not yet.
I could see it in their expressions. They were waiting for details, for proof, for something they could either believe or dismiss. My uncle smiled again, but this time there was a hint of challenge in it. "Sounds interesting," he said. "But how's that actually going for you?" There it was. The real question behind the question. Not curiosity, but doubt. And as I looked around the table, I realized something. This was the moment everything would change. For a brief second, I let the silence sit. Everyone at the table was watching me, waiting for my answer. I could see it in their faces, the curiosity mixed with quiet disbelief. They were expecting something vague, something unimpressive, something that would confirm everything they had always believed about me. I didn't rush. I picked up my glass, took a small sip of water, and placed it back down carefully. My calmness only made the moment heavier. Then, in a steady voice, I said, "I've built a few income streams over the years, businesses, investments, things like that." A couple of people nodded politely, but I could tell they still weren't taking me seriously. So, I continued. "My net worth is around $2.5 million. The words landed softly, but the impact was immediate. Silence. Not the casual kind, the kind that fills a room when no one knows how to respond. The kind that forces people to rethink everything they thought they knew. I watched their expressions change in real time. The faint smirks disappeared. Eyebrows lifted. Someone across the table nearly dropped their fork. My uncle, who had asked the questions so confidently, suddenly had nothing to say. "2 point what?" one cousin whispered, almost as if they hadn't heard me correctly. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. For years, I had imagined what this moment might feel like. I thought it would bring satisfaction, maybe even a sense of victory. But what I actually felt was something else entirely: calm. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about finally standing in my truth without needing their approval. No one laughed now. No one made side comments. The energy at the table had completely shifted. Conversations that once flowed so easily were now replaced with awkward glances and forced smiles. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking down on me. They were trying to understand me. And in that silence, louder than any argument I could have made, everything they believed about me collapsed. After I dropped the truth about my net worth, I didn't wait for applause, questions, or even compliments. I simply took a deep breath and looked around the table. For the first time, I noticed the weight of years of judgment lift off my shoulders, not because they acknowledged me, but because I had finally acknowledged myself. I realized something important in that moment. Success isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you are capable. And I had done that. Quietly, patiently, on my own terms. No one could erase the years I had struggled. No one could deny the effort, the sacrifices, the countless nights I had spent learning, failing, and building. And at that table, I didn't need them to say it out loud. The silence spoke louder than words ever could. I stood up, subtly straightening my back. Everyone's eyes followed me, some still filled with disbelief, others with curiosity. I smiled, calm, confident, unshakable. I didn't need validation. I didn't need their approval. I only needed to know I had arrived, not as the failure they had labeled me, but as someone who had taken control of their life and built something meaningful. As I walked toward the door, I felt a mix of emotions: pride, relief, and a strange sense of freedom. For years, I had carried their judgments with me, letting them define my worth. But tonight, I left that old version of myself behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Their opinions no longer mattered. What mattered was the journey I had taken, the challenges I had overcome, and the person I had become. And in that moment, I understood the real victory. It wasn't the net worth, or the stunned silence at the table, or even their shocked expressions. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence I had found within myself, the knowledge that I had finally written my own story, one that no one else could define. Walking out into the night, I smiled. I was no longer the failure. I was me, stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.